Hey there, Global Church family. Welcome to the ongoing conversation about international missions at Fellowship Bible Church, where you get a front row seat to hear what God is continually doing to establish His church around the world. My name is Michael Newland, and I'm your host for today. We are joined by our missions pastor, Jim Poole, to discuss his recent trip to Rwanda and Zambia. So, welcome, Jim.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're definitely, obviously, a regular on this podcast with good reason. Yeah, so the season, or I kind of think of it as a marathon of trips to Africa, continues. So we're going to talk today about your most recent trip to Rwanda and Zambia, as I mentioned just a second ago. But yeah, tell us a little bit again. I don't know that we've framed it for everybody, or maybe we just need to review. Like, why is it that it's so intense here the last month, and now with another, this other trip, and then you've got another one you're leaving in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quickly, tell us why. How did that come about?
Right, yeah, so the history with how and why Scott and I are making all these trips to these various African countries is last April. We took a trip to Nigeria, and ECWA had brought all of their missionaries to these Francophone countries to Nigeria, to Jos. And we had a conference there unpacking for them the meta-narrative, unpacking for them, giving them an overview of the Knowing God lessons. And then they were very appreciative. They really enjoyed our content and what the Lord did during that time, where they said, hey, you need to bring these lessons and this teaching to our country, where we are missionaries.
Right.
And so we said, well, you need to talk to Joshua, who was overseeing EMS right now and these missionary works of ECWA in all these different countries. And so then in the fall, when Joshua and Simon were here for the missions conference last year, we got together and laid out a plan and a strategy to go to all these different countries. And so that's how these 15 different countries came about, is through the conference that we made last April, and Josh with these EMS
Right.
missionaries at these different locations. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fascinating, but that's definitely a shift in the approach, because that's much more intense than you guys are traveling a lot, but to try to hit these 15 countries in a few short months, to the point where you're actually splitting up, where you normally don't do that. That's certainly a different approach. What I'd really like to do is, for the folks that have never been on a missions trip with the FBC Missions Group, just paint a little bit of a picture of what the logistics look like in getting to these places. Because I know I just feel like a lot of people think you just go to the airport, jump on a plane, you land, and then you do your conference, or you do what you're going to do, and then jump on a plane, come home, and it's all good. But it's not that way. I know.
Right.
When we took the youth to Zambia last summer, I think we were over 30 hours just getting to the first place where we had a conference. So how about on this trip? Like, what did that look like for you? Fortunately, we live near Dulles relatively, so that's always a good starting point. But how did it play out from there?
Yeah, it is helpful to be near Dulles on the East Coast, where it can get a lot of just straight international flights. Yeah, it's a long ways to get there. There are you can go straight straight to Africa. You can go through Europe. You can go through Asia. Sometimes we go through Istanbul, Turkish Airlines. Either way you shake it, though, it's a long time to get there. Going to Rwanda, I was supposed to go through Brussels, and so I was supposed to leave Dulles at 6:30 in the evening, and go through Brussels and then on to Rwanda. But because of mechanical issues, that flight actually ended up being canceled after a long, drawn out. I'll spare the details for that situation.
Delayed 10 minutes at a time.
Delayed, then canceled at like 1 a.m. on whatever night that was. So anyways, I scramble at 1 a.m. at Dulles to get on another flight. So I got on an Ethiopian flight that went through Addis Ababa in Ethiopia,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there it went on to Rwanda, and that's the longest route to take because from here to Addis it's 13 hours, and then it was about 6 hours back to Rwanda,
Right.
and so that's why I was trying to avoid that route. Then going through Brussels was a much easier route. So I'm supposed to leave Dulles at 6:30 in the evening. I ended up leaving Dulles at 10:30 the next morning, and so I actually just stayed at the airport.
Mm.
By the time I got it all sorted out, where I was going to go, what airlines and route, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and it wasn't even worth driving home to try to get an hour or two of sleep. So I
Right.
just stayed at Dulles, slept on a chair for a couple hours, then got on a flight that left at 10:30 in the morning. So I hadn't even left Dulles yet, and that was already the experience. So
Right. Right.
that doesn't always happen though. Sometimes it goes smoother than others. The way that the flights always work, everybody knows about how travel plans work. Sometimes when you get to the country, the conference is in the city where you land. I'm going to go to Chad here in a couple of days. I'm going to land in Chad, spend the night, take a 6-hour bus ride to where the conference is.
Okay.
So that happens sometimes. And then, like I'll share in a minute about Zambia, we landed in Lusaka, and then we took a domestic flight to Ndola, which is where the conference was in
Right.
Zambia. So there's different ways. Sometimes the conference is right where you land. Sometimes you need a domestic flight. Sometimes you need a bus ride.
Hmm.
I know Scott and Joshua had horrible airplane logistics in Cameroon. So
Yeah.
it just depends. Sometimes it goes smooth, and it's as trouble free as it can be with this
Right.
long international trips. But sometimes there's logistical headaches.
Right. Right. And it's always the compromise between being convenient for you and Scott and the folks here from the U.S. being close to an airport, but then it means much longer travel times for the folks that we're going to see.
Right,
Because
right,
it's rare that they happen to be based out of the capital city or the city with a big enough airport. So,
right, right.
So yeah, there's no doubt it's always a challenge to get that worked out. But
Mhm.
God's sovereign and all of that, even
That's
a
right.
long night in the airport.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So you mentioned you went through Addis and then you landed in, I guess, Kigali,
Right.
the capital of Rwanda. So there, Rwanda being a small country, you probably didn't have another flight there, correct?
No, it was just a pretty short drive to where we met for the conference. It was about a 20-minute drive. The whole country of Rwanda, like square miles, is about the size of the state of Maryland.
Hmm.
So the whole country is very small. And it was the cleanest African country that I'd ever been in. And it was like, wow, it was a shock.
Yeah.
There was no trash laying around. I mean, African countries are just notorious for trash everywhere, side of the road, blowing all over the place. But there wasn't a bit of trash. It was clean. Roads were nice. Curbs, sidewalks, landscaping, and shrubs and bushes were nicely kept. So it was a pleasant surprise landing there in a short drive to where we had the conference.
Yeah. No, that sounds definitely not typical for
No.
for what we're used to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds really
Joshua
nice.
jokingly said, he lives in Nigeria, which is, a very, dirty African country. He said, well, when I retire, I'm going to retire to Rwanda.
Rwanda, right? So this was the first
Yeah.
time for anybody from FBC to be in Rwanda on one of our
Yes, and
trips.
Joshua as well.
And for Joshua,
Joshua had never been there either, so it was his first time there as well.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So well, let's continue with the theme of logistics real quick to wrap that up. So in Rwanda, short car ride, and you were at the conference center. When you finished there, back to the airport in Kigali, and where did you go from there?
From there, we flew to Lusaka, which is the capital city of Zambia.
Right.
And from there, we flew to another small town, not really that small, actually, about a 40-minute flight to Ndola, Zambia, which is where the conference was in Ndola. And you've been to Ndola.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
So I can tell our listeners that this isn't switching planes from the Boeing 777 to a 737. What size plane were you on between Kigali and Lusaka, and then between Lusaka and Ndola?
Yeah, Kigali to Osaka, it was a pretty big plane, a
Mm-hmm.
good sized plane, and we made a stop in another country or two, which is oftentimes the case when you're going from African countries. They'll make a stop to either
Right.
pick up other passengers or drop off other passengers, which doesn't happen in the States.
Correct. Yeah.
They'll do that flying around Africa. But it was a big plane, good sized plane. But when we got on the flight leaving Lusaka, coming to Ndola, it was very small. It was one row of seats on one side in the aisle, and then two seats on the other side of the aisle. So,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in the States we'll have like a two, then an aisle, then a two. This was a one, then an aisle, and then a two.
Right.
Only probably 12, maybe 15 rows like that. So it was very small
Right.
airplane.
Right. So it was probably a turboprop and not a jet, or was it a?
It was a
jet?
turboprop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well then, tell us about Rwanda. I mean, you just introduced a little bit of what the country was like and how a little atypical it sounds from most of the other African countries we've been to. But yeah, what was it like there as the first FPCer? What was the language? Were you communicating in English? Were you communicating in French? What?
Yeah. So the language there, I think I can pronounce it right. It was actually Kinyarwandan was the language. So it
Okay.
wasn't French. It was the national language of Rwanda.
Okay.
And so the teaching was being translated into their language. And yeah, I think there were 90 some odd people that were there. And it was very similar to, many of the other conferences that we've been sharing about,
Right.
the most recent podcasts with these trips that we've been taking. People came from, lots of different denominations, many different churches were represented there.
Mm-hmm.
And but very hungry hearts, very open to the teaching, very receptive to the teaching. Never had really heard foundational grace-based Bible teaching like this, where we would begin with the meta narrative and then teach, progressively and foundationally and chronologically through the scriptures, just unfolding the eternal plan of God and the heart of God and the ways of God and the love of God and the mind of God.
Mm-hmm.
Just never heard it, and just really, really greatly appreciated it. And as each day would continue on, first day is kind of an introductory day, so to speak, and they're like, "Wow, what is this?" And it's new, and they're
Right.
not taken back, but they're kind of like, "What is this?" And so there's questions. Is this? We're just going.
Right.
After the first day of teaching, we're just gonna we're just gonna lead us, so to speak.
Sure.
And as the second and third day, you can really see people seeing it from the scriptures. And so, where after day one, they're like, "What is this?" After day, 2 and 3, they're settling in and really beginning to appreciate it. And then, day 3 and 4, they're actually beginning to get it.
Uh-huh.
And when you ask questions in 3 and 4, you can see their understanding the progression of the 4 days, because everything builds upon other days. I mean, you shared your podcast. You were with us in Togo,
Right.
and so yeah, how it works out and plays out there. In fact, I have a testimony here of a gentleman that I'd like to play. It's about 4 minutes long, and this gentleman's name is Sabenza, and he was the one who was doing the translation for us.
Okay.
And he's a pastor, and he also is a Bible school teacher, professor. And so I'm going to play this recording here for us. I'm going to try to get as close to the mic as I can, and it'll give firsthand testimony, not just from me telling about what people thought of it, but actually hearing
Yeah, I
from
think that's great.
someone who was there in his own words about it. He's going to break it into 3 different parts. So one is going to be, he'll talk about how the approach is different, so we can be listening for that as we hear his testimony. You'll hear him comment about how they were teaching about grace, but actually they were teaching law. So as they heard the conference and the teaching through the 4 days, he thought they were teaching grace, but he'll make a comment. We weren't really teaching grace. We were still teaching the law. And then he's going to talk about how it was impactful to hear the whole plan of God. So as we're listening to his testimony here, we can be listening with those things in mind.
Okay.
I do. Concerning the training, yeah, I have been in many trainings. And I have been interpreting. For 13 years, I've been interpreting, invited to interpret. But the experience I had through these teachings was very different from what all trainings that I've passed through. Yeah, number one, the approach is different. The approach that I have seen is that to help the audience or the students, the pastors, to focus on God and to realize who God is. Often we have been wondering, how are we failing? How are we not coping? Why not being like Abraham, Moses, like others? But we have learned that those people did not do anything, but God chose them, trained them, revealed himself to them until they have grown in faith. Then they reached to the level to trust God. We have been teaching, Pastor and I have teaching a lot about grace. Even many people hated me too because of that. But I have received a new way of teaching grace. Sometimes we were teaching grace as we are teaching law, and people are teaching grace as they are teaching law. And as the result, people are keeping sinning, keeping in their old life. But I can say that the way that we have learned about grace is that all is about grace, and grace itself helps us to learn to lean on God, and it changes us. Another thing that has helped us is the plan of God. The plan of God is great. We used to focus on creation, starting on creation, and go on up to rapture. But we didn't focus on the eternal plan of God. These 4 stages: eternal plan, preparation, fulfillment, and the results. We didn't focus them. So the great picture of the plan of God has helped me to understand more and how I can apply the truth of the Bible. And you have learned that all is about grace. God planned based on grace, on the blood of Jesus. And that was the plan of God. And God is the one who planned, is carrying out his plan, and will fulfill it. So we have viewed God, the way we are viewing God now is different from the way we viewed God. God is not demanding us, but is wanting relationship. And his relationship will draw us to him, and we will stay away from sins. Yeah, I can say in my mind, I have changed, and I'm committed to use this method, and I'm committed to use this doctrine. That's why I would want to know more these trainings and to learn more books about in this approach. Personally, I will commit myself. I will do the ministry differently. God bless you. Amen.
Yeah, amen. Well, that's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, that with me having been in Togo, that sounds very similar to the type of testimonies that we were there together, that we were hearing from the folks there. And I have no doubt, in Ghana, it was the same. I'm really excited on the schedule for the podcasts. I know that you and Scott are going to talk about this meta narrative and looking at sort of an even bigger picture. the gentleman mentions, they used to start teaching at Genesis 1, and that's what we encourage them to do
Yeah.
for decades.
Sure. That's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And it wasn't until just in the last couple of years that God has sort of been revealing, not that it hasn't always been there, but just a perspective of understanding, how God's sort of plan for the ages, it began way before creation.
Right.
It's this covenant that the Trinity had with each other. It's fascinating, totally exciting, and I'm really glad to see that we're going to cover that in a podcast that should be coming up. It's probably
we've recorded it
several weeks.
already.
You already have
I'm
recorded
just not sure when it's going to be released.
Okay, well, good. So it can't be too
Yeah.
much longer.
Right.
These have been coming out about weekly lately.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so good. So everybody kind of keep your eyes out for that. And your recording also reminds me, we have the audio wasn't often as good as what you had there, but we have uploaded several other testimonies from the previous trips.
Great.
I trust that there's a link in the description on YouTube. I would hope that it's there. It certainly should be findable. I haven't personally looked for it because I was content to know that I was successful at uploading it.
Yeah.
But I do want to do that because some of the other ones, I have no doubt they're really impactful.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
this is why we're doing it. It's not
Yeah.
for us to have a feather in our caps that we've traveled and who's got the most frequent flyer miles. It's the testimonies of the individuals who are attending the conferences that that's why we're doing it.
Yeah. It's about God, impacting people's lives, and when we're there and people are excited about what God is showing them, it makes it all worth it, because the traveling is no fun. Being away from your family is no fun, but the conditions aren't fun. But when you're there and you see people being excited about God and His Word and what He is showing them, and seeing things that He's never shown them before, and being free to enjoy a more full relationship and intimacy with Him, that makes it worth it. And so that's what it's about.
Oh yeah.
And so it's not about so as many testimonies and stories as we can get where people are sharing their stories themselves. That's really trying to do that as much as we can, because it's better than us sharing their story. It's better when they share their story.
Right. Yeah. And I can just attest to the fact that as difficult as the conditions can be, when you're there, there's no other place you'd want to be than right in the middle of that.
That's right.
It's really amazing to watch God work and kind of take the blinders off, like that gentleman said, just to go from knew enough about grace to teach the law using the grace language. Basically, he didn't express it that way, but that's the way I kind of understand it. He was using sort of grace terms, but it was still the law. But that's not the way God intends it. So fascinating. Okay, so take us now to Zambia. Again, the youth, we were there this past summer. So a lot of folks that are members here at FBC would know, like Michael Boone and Cedric were there. Cedric Chippendale were there in Zambia last summer. How many of these folks did you see, or did they participate at all? I mean, this was a different group. It wasn't the same. This wasn't the same group with the same objectives, but how much was there overlap?
Yeah, there were probably 5 to 7 people out of the 97 or 98 that were there.
Right.
That I recognized and knew from the conference in Ndola last year. So it was fun to see them again and reconnect with them again. There was some overlap there with them this time.
Right. Yeah. So one thing that stood out to me when I was there in Ndola with Michael and Bernadette Boone, they always make a lot of use of breakout sessions. Not that that's unique to them, but Bernadette said that she had experienced that was really beneficial, and we implemented that on the first of the trips in Togo, and I believe Scott did the same. His first was Cameroon, correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he did the. I'm not sure if they did the sessions because their trip was shortened because of their travel
Right,
logistics,
right.
and so they might have they missed a
Okay.
whole day of teaching. And so anyway, I'm not totally sure
Okay.
of their schedule.
But still, tell me about like I was there for the first one and saw that used pretty effectively. But now you've got a total of 4 of these conferences under your
Right.
belt and about to do the 5th one. What have you learned over the course of those 4? What are you going to do differently on the 5th? Or tell me. I hope to go on another one.
Mhm.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So what we do is we primarily do the bulk of our teaching in the morning, and then in Zambia we did one session after lunch, and then in the afternoon we would um, give give everybody there 6 or 8 questions specifically related to the teaching that day. And so we split the whole group up into small groups, from as many as like 10 people down to 7 people.
Mm-hmm.
So we split the group up into smaller groups, and we'd give them very specific questions that we came up with related to the teaching of that day.
Right.
And then each group, they were to have a facilitator for the group, and then in each group was to have like a secretary. Sometimes they called him a scribe,
Right.
who was capturing and writing down the answers for the group for whatever the question was. So we did that every afternoon. We did it together when we were in
Right.
Togo. We did the same thing in Ghana. We did the same thing in Rwanda, and then we did the same thing in Zambia, and we're going to do the same thing in Chad next week.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we found that to be really beneficial because they took the content in their Bibles of what they had heard that day, and then they had the questions, and then they was really neat to see them wrestling with and interacting with the content
Mm-hmm.
instead of so all day so far they sat and listened. Now they would ask some questions, but mostly it was listening.
Right.
And so now they get a chance to engage and interact with the material amongst their groups. It was really fun to observe that. And a couple of times, if I knew there was an English speaker in that group, I would go to that group and sit next to the English speaker and say, hey, just translate for me. I wouldn't be there to answer the questions because I would want them to do that,
Right.
answer the questions. But it was fun to just listen to them wrestling with the question and wrestling with the content of the teaching for the
Mhm.
day.
Right.
It was real enjoyable. And so then the next morning, we would have all the secretaries or the scribes or whoever wrote down all the answers. We would bring them all up front, and I would ask the question again, and then each one would give their answer. Team 1 would give their answer, group 2 would give their answer, group 3 would give their answer, group 4 would give, and so on. And so you could hear some of the answers would be similar, some of the answers would be different, some of the answers would be right, some of the answers would be wrong.
Right.
And so this is in front of the whole group. I mean, we're all there to learn together, and
Sure.
nobody was worried about it. It wasn't like, oh, you got the wrong answer, you got the right. Well, that's not the point. So it was fun to hear their answers because they had just heard the material that
Right.
day. So it's one thing to say it and teach it, but it's another thing for it to be like understood or caught. And
Yes.
so that's just interesting, because I tried to keep the questions pretty easy. They weren't tricky,
Right.
and I tried to keep the questions easy. But then to hear their answers the next morning, it was like, okay, some got it, but some didn't get it.
Right.
And so when the answers weren't right, I would summarize the answer to the question. And so that I would take like a 3-minute summary to the answer of that question. And so we did that every afternoon. We did that every morning, the next morning. And I think everybody enjoyed it. They enjoyed getting in their small groups. They enjoyed their scribe coming up front, giving the answer. Sometimes if the answer was really wrong, everybody would really kind of laugh at the group and good fun. Nobody
Right.
was like laughing rudely.
Right.
But it was a good time. So I found that to be helpful in the afternoon. And, we'd been studying all day.
Yeah.
They'd been sitting and listening all day. afternoon, people get tired, and that I would be
Yeah.
if I'd sat and listened to a seminar or a conference all day. So to get them
Yeah.
engaging with the material and engaging with other people each afternoon and working through the questions, it was fun and I think real beneficial.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. In the podcast on Togo, Christiana, my wife, she highlighted how the level of concentration that these guys are bringing to the table, to the group, was just incredible.
Yeah.
It would be it wouldn't be able to, we couldn't pull that off here.
right,
People wouldn't have the endurance and
Sure.
concentration
Yeah.
to do it. But yeah, that sounds really good.
Mhm.
Really good, the way to keep them engaged. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Another
good.
thing that was interesting about Zambia was that we formed a WhatsApp group,
Yeah.
and we had never done that before in Togo or Ghana or Rwanda, but I didn't bring up the idea. But I can't remember who it was, Joshua or somebody said or maybe Yusuf is the Nigerian missionary there. Maybe it was his idea,
Right.
But I said, hey, can you guys put me on the WhatsApp group? So everybody's not on it, but there's, I don't know, a good 50, 60 people in this WhatsApp group since we've left the conference. And so it's been fun to kind of, people are interacting and this and that, and people have posed questions. And so people give answers, and I've been able to give some thoughts to people's questions, kind of watch some of the answers that come in and just have discussion.
Yeah.
So it's been fun because so many times you go and it's, in a sense, it's kind of a one and done, but having this Zambian Grace Conference WhatsApp group
Right.
has given it a little bit of it's kept the conversation going
Yeah.
after we've left, which has been enjoyable,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
helpful. So
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, technology that can really keep the conversation going and really kind of multiply the impact.
Right.
So that's really exciting. I know. Yeah, that's a good way to do that. I know I had my mind blown a little bit this week. Scott McManigal sent out an email to the missions committee talking about, again, this is just such an intense time of travel and teaching for you and Scott in particular, but for the committee. And then Scott kind of laid it out in that email how much follow-up it's going to require. And, WhatsApp aside.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was daunting. I mean, it was, really would encourage our listeners to continue to really pray about not just, the travel and the conferences as they're going on, but the follow-up
Right.
that we're going to do, and the follow-up that, we can't do, that we shouldn't do, that God is going to do. He doesn't need us for any of that.
Right.
But just continue to ask God to really do that and grow these people in the knowledge of Him, and that they could be so grounded in it that the folks that they're teaching will see it, because this isn't you're teaching the teachers, right? And so
Right. That's right.
it's really critical that they get it, because they're in a position to pass it on. So,
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, anything else? Any other kind of parting thoughts?
I will mention that in both locations, particularly in Rwanda, the people appreciated the lessons so much that that Samson is the Nigerian missionary there in Zambia, and he said, along with some of the participants, he said, we need to get these lessons in our own language, because a lot of the folks can read English, but it's not their first language.
Right.
And so they're reading it as a second. They don't speak it hardly at all, but they can read it, but the comprehension is limited because it's their second language. So it was a great, very encouraging to see them want to, on their own, translate the lessons into their own language.
Right.
So there was a conversation with 3 people there. The gentleman we heard the testimony from earlier on this podcast, he would be one of 3 of the translation team. So that was great. And the same thing in Zambia. It was being translated into Bimba in Zambia. And the same thing there as well. They came up with the idea as well, hey, we really need these lessons in our own language. And so they're seeing the value of getting them translated And so that was very encouraging.
Right.
Again, it helps to speak to the continuation of it. They weren't, oh, it was a great conference, go home and throw our book on the
Yeah.
shelf, let it collect dust. No, it was a great time. We learned a lot. God showed us a lot, so much so that they themselves are valuing getting the lessons translated into their own language.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
So.
I can speak from a 20-year history with the missions committee that translating lessons into the local languages has always been sort of a foundation of what we do.
Right.
But to hear that, come so directly from them and know that, we're stretched so thin right now that they're going to have to run with it. But it sounds like that they will.
They will.
And so
That's right.
that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yep.
Really
Yep.
exciting. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being a part of today's episode. And for all our listeners and viewers, remember that we always love to hear from you. Send over your thoughts, questions, or requests. You can go over to fbcva.org/podcasts and write us your notes and comments. And if you know of anyone who hasn't checked out our Global Church podcast, remind them that they can follow us on YouTube or wherever they get their podcasts, where you can also find FBC's other two podcasts, the Sermon Spotlight and the Fellowship Family podcast. And also, if you want to learn more about our global church partners, make sure you check out the Missions Stairwell right next to the North Main entrance. Each month, the Grace Ministry of Global Missions highlights a different global church partner. This month, we are highlighting the Pokarin Church in Southeast Asia. In the stairwell, you can find info sheets about the Pokarin Church, and that includes prayer requests as well as a word search for the kids and a Pokarin recipe as well. So again, thanks for watching and listening, and remember that it is Christ who is continually building his church until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God.